Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the subcommittee, the Audit Subcommittee of the Springfield City Council. It is now 3:32 on Wednesday, April 14th. We are joined by Councilor Davila, who is not a member of this committee. Right now, we do not have a quorum of the committee, but I do not believe we are voting on any items this afternoon. With that said, the agenda is a presentation of the Office of Internal Audit's fiscal year 2022 plan, as well as the results of a fiscal year 2020 financial study audit done by Powers and Sullivan. And with that said, I will turn it over to Mr. No. Mr. No, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll share my screen to present our FY22 audit plan. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. Okay, great. So we are required by city ordinance to present our annual audit plan in April. So our annual audit plan sets out our agenda for the upcoming fiscal year. So the scope of our plan includes both city and the school department. In terms of looking at the departments and its programs. I'll move to page 2 to talk about our resources. There are 3 staff in our department, which includes myself. I have a vacancy that I expect to fill in June of 2021. There are about 5,300 hours in a given year. And of that, we spend about 50% doing performance audits, 20% allocated to maintaining the city's fraud hotline, and 30% on administrative training and other duties. We base our annual audit plan on a risk assessment. So what we do is focus on those departments and programs that have the most impact on the city. And our risk assessment includes certain risk factors like financial exposure, the quality of internal control systems, liquidity, nature of cash, activities in a department, complexity of operations, regulatory compliance, the last time the department or program was audited, and the public impact. And we assign a point system to these risk factors associated with each department, and our model spits out a risk rating. And we focus on those areas that have the highest risk rating or that are deemed high. I also want to point out that when we look at, when we do our risk assessment and our annual audit plan, we also try to factor in things that could pop up. So we try to allocate some time for those special request projects, which haven't been defined in this current audit plan, which I'll go in terms of the hours in a bit. So with that, I'll go directly into our audit plan. So our audit plan or our engagements are made up of 3 categories. We do required audits or ongoing, we do follow-up reviews, and we do performance audits. So starting off with required ongoing projects, we're slated to do a student activities agreed upon procedures review for the year ended June 30th, 2021. So what we do is we audit the student activities for 2 years, and we have Powers and Sullivan audit the 3rd year. So and that's allowable by Mass General laws. They allow city departments to do these audits, but for 2 years. But the 3rd year, they want an outside party or an external auditor to do the audit. So Powers and Sullivan are in the process of wrapping up the audit for 2020, and they should be issuing that shortly. But we're slated to do it for fiscal year 22. We also do reviews on the city's investments, just to make sure that they're in compliance with Massachusetts general laws. We do these reviews quarterly. We noted that the city is very conservative in their investment policy and holdings. We're also required to monitor the external audit of the city And that's what Powers and Sullivan are here to do, is to present the results of their financial statement audit for the past fiscal year. Moving on to follow-up reviews. So as part of our department process, we do follow-up reviews on audits that we had performed a year or two ago. So we do these reviews just to make sure that our recommendations have been implemented, and if so, we test to ensure that they've been implemented, and and there aren't any other issues that should be communicated to city management and the audit committee. For those recommendations that haven't been implemented, we convey that in our report, saying they're still open, and get an updated response from city departments as to their updated plans to implement those recommendations. So those follow-up reviews consist of doing follow-up reviews at Health and Human Services, TJ O'Connor, the bulk trash sticker program at DPW, and at the Springfield Police Department. There are two programs related to compensatory overtime and the educational incentive review. We're also slated to do a cybersecurity information technology review at the Springfield Police Department. We're going to follow up on the reviews that were done in 2016 and 2018, but this time focusing more on cybersecurity protocols. I do have to mention that this is subject to funding, as the work is performed by an outside consultant, Wolf & Company. Then moving on to performance audit, we have two carryover engagements from FY21 that pertain to payroll and overtime. So those will be done both at the city and the school department, and it's a fairly encompassing audit. So it's gonna, this is probably the two biggest audits that we'll do in FY22. Next, we're going to take a look at the fleet maintenance program at Department of Public Works. And lastly, we have two smaller programs, one at the Parks Department, CUI Arena, and athletic fees at the school department. We're going to make sure that they have proper protocols of handling cash at these two programs. And we have outsourced two reviews to Powers and Sullivan. I've asked them to take a look at the inventory management program at the Office of Housing and Code Enforcement. And as I mentioned, we have allocated some hours, 360 hours, for special requests by city management and mayor or the audit committee. Any questions? If there aren't any, I will turn it over to Mike Nelligan from Powers and Sullivan.
Hold on one second, Mr. No. I know we are also joined by Councilor Allen, who is a member of this committee. Do we have any questions for Mr. No regarding the proposed 2022 audit plan?
I have no questions at this time.
All right. Seeing that there are no questions, I had two questions. One, can you just elaborate a little bit more on what it is that you're doing with respect to code enforcement in that audit? And then the second, well, go ahead. I'll let you answer that question first.
Okay. With code enforcement and Office of Housing, I've asked Powers and Sullivan, who are external auditors, to take a look at the inventory management program at these two departments. So we want to ensure that the inventory or the equipment that they use, like for housing inspections, like at the Department of Housing, they have expensive like radon machines and expensive air test kits, that they're properly safeguarded, managed, and protected and recorded. So we want to make sure that these assets don't go missing. And that they're properly accounted for. So I've asked them to take a look at that program for the city of Springfield.
And why Powers and Sullivan and not internally, Mr. No?
So Powers and Sullivan, we have an agreement with Powers and Sullivan that they will take a look at a couple of programs annually for the city of Springfield. So we're taking that. So that allows us to focus on other audit areas. So we're able to do more with them involved.
Understood. And then my last question was regarding the student activities.
Yes.
Didn't we do an audit of the student activities in the school department previously?
We do it every year, sir.
You do it every year. Okay. All
Yes.
right. Got it. Okay. If there are no further questions and I see no hands raised in the queue, then we will turn it over. Did I hear somebody?
I'll wait. I had one, but I'll wait until we get going a little farther.
Okay. All right. So we'll hear from Powers and Sullivan.
Okay, so I'll stop my screen sharing if I can get to it. Let's see. Focus Springfield, are you able to stop my screen sharing? I don't seem to see that option on my end.
Yes, I can do that for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to introduce the team from Powers and Sullivan that's online, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for having this meeting and allow us to join you today. My name is Michael Nelligan, and my co-partner to my right on the screen is Todd Jerzyk, and below to the left is Rebecca Gamsby. So Todd and I are co-partners on the engagement, and we share responsibilities. We like to have two partners on each engagement, especially ones of this magnitude. And we share responsibilities throughout the whole process. And Rebecca is our manager on the job. She's been on the job for, I think, what, 3 or 4 years now. And she's very involved in the day-to-day auditing, as well as Todd and I are. So, and then we have about 5 others that join us throughout the audit at various stages. So there's a whole team that's dedicated to the audit. And this past year, we've done it remotely, and we plan to do it mostly remotely again this year, with the exception of the site visits and then any other meetings that we need to go to, or send if there's any information that we need to come out and view, we will do that. But for the most part, it's all uploaded through our secure portal. And it's actually been working out quite well, because there's a database now that's on the portal that you folks can access whenever you'd like, by year. All the files are organized by year and by area. And it gives both of us an opportunity to look at what was provided last year versus what we need this year, and helps facilitate the process quite well. So I'm going to also share a PowerPoint that we have, and I'll go through that really quickly. So Young, I have a little red button up on top of mine that says stop sharing, and I don't know if you had that too, but I think that will work. But I'm going to quickly go through this if it's okay with everybody.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So I got to get it to, there we go. So first page is just a general thank you to everyone in the city, the opportunity to serve as your external auditors. Kind of an overview of our objectives for today. We're going to talk about the process, the results. There's a section on the 2021 audit plan that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. There's a couple of future GASB statements that I wanted to mention, and then overall planning discussions with management that are ongoing. And for the most part, those focus on how we're going to do the audit, when we're going to do the audit. We're talking a lot about the COVID monies that are available to the city, when those will be spent, where they're recorded in the various funds, and how they need to be audited in accordance with the federal guidelines, which are coming out, I'd like to say fast and furious, but not so fast and furious. But we are starting to get some of the guidelines that we need to audit those grants. We did not audit any of those in 2020, as the monies didn't reach the major fund program level. So our audit objectives, this talks about our main objective is to audit the financial statements of the city and the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Those are the two main things. And after that, we issue a management letter each year. And then we also do some other projects, like Young mentioned. We do the student activities every third year. We do the school's end of the year report, agreed upon procedures every year. And we also do a standalone pension audit every year. And we had a meeting last week to talk about that. So that's a separate engagement that we do as well. This next screen talks about responsibilities, our responsibilities under generally accepted auditing standards, and management's responsibilities for the preparation of the financial statements in accordance with GAAP. Our 2020 audit results, we unmodified audit opinions on all of the reports. There were no significant instances of noncompliance or other matters that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. So all of your reports have clean audit opinions, no issues, no question costs or findings that were reported. They're all clean. And I'll talk about which programs we audited on the federal side when I get to that screen. And then I'm just going to mention a few highlights of the audit and then open it up for questions afterwards. So at last year, at June 30, 2020, the net pension liability that was recorded on the books was $814 million. And the net OPEB liability was $1,476,000,000. Those seem to be hot topics that a lot of people are talking about in the last few years since GASB 68 and 75 came out that required those liabilities to be fully recorded on the financials. And you are fully in compliance with those standards currently, and all those amounts are fully recorded on the financials. The 2019 CAFR was provided. They got the award for the 2019 CAFR. The 2020 CAFR has been submitted to the GFOA, the Government Financial Officers Association, and this is an optional reporting that the city does. They've elected to do a comprehensive annual financial report and submit it to the GFOA for the award program. The report this year was 153 pages long, and it has 12 required sections, starting with the cover page, believe it or not, is a required section. And the other sections are the table of contents, the transmittal letter to the citizens of the city from the CFO, goes through our audit opinion, and our audit opinion has to be a clean opinion or you can't submit the report for the award program. Management's discussion and analysis follows that. That gives a 2-year comparison of the financial statements at a summary level. And then it talks about the major funds and budget results and things like that. The financial statements follow that. Those are followed by the notes to the financial statements. And then the remaining requirements are some required supplementary information on pension and OPEB funding over 10 years. And then there's a combining statements that are break out the activity that is recorded in the non-major columns of the financial statements. And then the statistical section follows that. So these are again the components of the financials. And then the statistical section gives you 10-year trend data on financial trends. And I've indicated the page numbers if you wanted to go look at those. All of our reports should be on your should be up on your website at this point. So it talks about financial trends, revenue capacity, debt capacity, demographic and economic information, operating information, and this last one is not a requirement, but you also include your free cash and stabilization balances for each year. The financial position highlights the general fund budget of $721 million last year. Actual revenues came in $8.3 million short of that budget, mainly from real estate and personal property tax collections, and the shortfall of about $2.5 million from the casino. Your expenditures were under budget by $15 million, including $27 million of school carryovers for the most part. The general fund balance totaled $116.6 million at the end of the year, and that includes $51 million of stabilization funds that are to be reported along with the general fund. Your unassigned fund balance was $82.4 million, and your total fund balance as a percentage of total general fund expenditures, which is a metrics that the rating agencies look at was 15.5%. They like to see that ratio somewhere between 7 and 15. And you're right on top of the top number in that range. So that's a good signal. Pension
Mike,
fund. Go ahead. Sorry.
Mike, pardon me. Could you just explain that 15.5? Maybe you just went ahead on it?
Yeah, you take the total fund balance and divide it by your total general fund expenditures. And I'll just flip. I have a copy of the report in front of me, so I'll just go to those pages and tell you what. So the total of 116.5 million, actually 116.6 million, is divided by your total general fund expenditures of $752 million. And that is a ratio that the rating agencies basically have come up with over the years to look how your fund balance stacks up against other governments. And they like to see that in a range of somewhere between 7 and 15% on average. And I've had clients where that ratio was up in the 20% range, and that's somewhat considered to be excess, that maybe those funds could be used better elsewhere. So again, they like to see it in that 7 to 15% range. And you don't get penalized or anything for being more than that, but they might suggest that you use those funds.
So you would be happy with our ratio of 15.5? Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think you've got you could always use more reserves, but that's about where the rating agencies expect you to be at that point. I think if you had a lot more, let's say you had double that, they might start questioning whether you should start putting that to uses other places rather than just keeping it in the bank.
Is this I always had in my head, since I've been in doing this city council stuff, that your stabilization fund should be 5 to 15%. There's some relationship you're trying to hold on to between the annual budget of 720 million or whatever. And so say the annual budget 720, roughly what it is, that our stabilization should be 5 to 15% of that, which would mean it would be 5 times 5% of
so it'd be 35, a little over 35 million.
Would be 35 million, and we're at 50. So are we saying the same thing from two different angles? From two different angles? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if Pat Burns wants to chime in on that conversation at all.
Yes, the city's financial ordinances require that our loan stabilization fund, which currently has, I believe, 43.5 million, is between 5 and 15% of the city's overall budget. So right now we're at about 6% of stabilization to overall budget, whereas Powers and Sullivan is looking at our entire fund balance, which includes other components other than just that one stabilization fund.
Okay. So when you said the loan something, what's the difference between the loan stabilization and the general stabilization? Is there a difference there, Pat?
Yes, that's the ordinance was written in such a way that we have one stabilization fund that's called a fiscal reserve fund, which is mandated to be between 5 and 15%. So earlier this year, we did a transfer out of 6.5 million, I believe, to pay settlements. So that brought that balance down from the 50 million you had mentioned down to close to a little below 44 million.
Oh, so our current stabilization is more in the 44 million range?
Correct.
And that was because of that recent payout, that 7 million, 6 or 7.
I believe that was done in December.
Yep. That's the first time I've seen that or talked about that in writing. I knew it had to come from there, but I didn't know what the resulting balance was, because that hurt our ratio directly.
Yes, the ratio went down approximately a percentage point because of that.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, next slide is just talk about the pension funding in the most recent valuation. Your pension funding is up to just slightly over 30% now, 30.23 versus 27.2 in the last valuation.
Well, that's good news. That's good news. We've been fighting to get from 26 to 30. There we are. That's good.
Yeah.
I was hoping someone would say something about that.
Yeah, that's me. I've been at that one for a few years with you. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Good. Let's hope the market stays up there and that will stay hold up and even get any higher this year. I talked about OPEB when we first started. The full OPEB liability has been recorded, and it's $1.4 billion. We talked yesterday in a meeting that we had with the mayor's office, and I mentioned that the discount rate on the OPEB is about 2.3%, and you use a discount rate on the pension fund of about 7.25%. The effect of that, the discount rate being so low, is the reason why that liability is so high. When you start to fund OPEB liability with a little more money, and you start to get 10 or 15, $20 million in there and have a plan to keep on funding that, the actuaries will allow you to have a larger discount rate, a higher discount rate, and that will drop that liability significantly. That's really the first thing you want to do to get that liability under control, is to get that discount rate up by having more funds invested. And unlike the pension discount rate, you have to earn your discount rate on the OPEB plan. You don't just pick it yourself. You have to earn it by committing to a funding policy and putting monies aside. And if you were able to get that discount rate up to 7%, like you have on the pension fund, that liability would probably drop in half. And that's one of the reasons that yours is so high compared to a lot of other communities, is that the funding level hasn't reached a critical point at this time. You've just got a little over $2.5 million in there compared to the 1.4 billion. So you're just getting started on that funding. Okay. At the bottom of that of this screen, the governmental debt totals $179 million at the end of last year. And your debt service on those monies was about 27.8 million in the budget. And that is 3.9% of the total budgetary expenditures. And again, the rating agencies look at that percentage as well, and they expect that to fall somewhere between 5 and 10%. You're still below that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the funding level that you receive on the school construction with the MSBA. It's been very high, and it's kept your total debt down a bit. So,
good job, Lindsay.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I remember when our debt service was like 40 million or 35 to 40 million, and we were trying to get it down. That, if I'm reading that right and understanding it right, that looks good. Yes. From where we were.
Yep, you did a big refunding years ago, and that saved you a lot of money. And you've got some special school debt that's being funded through a debt service fund that'll be paid off, I think, in about 2026 or 27. And that's about another 18 million that'll come off of that as well. So I'm going to keep going. The management letter.
I have a quick question if I may.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, good question. There you go on that slide there. So if I'm reading this correctly, the last two bullet points says general fund debt is 3.9%. So 3.9% of the budget goes toward debt. Is that what I'm reading?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
Yeah, I'm looking at the last bullet point there. It says fund debt service $27 million was 3.9 of the 2020 budget. So if I'm reading that correctly, that means that 3.9% of the budget goes to pay debt.
Of the total expenditures, 3.9% of that was for debt service. That totaled almost $28 million.
For debt service, okay.
Yeah.
So how is that different?
That's principal and interest.
Okay, how is that different from the other bullet point, the governmental debt of 179 million?
I'm not sure. I don't understand the question.
I'm just trying to differentiate between the last two bullet points. So the one that says governmental debt service, $179 million. What's the difference between that and the last bullet point?
Oh, so the total debt is 179 million. That's what you have in total. And
okay.
And the 27.8 was what your current year principal and interest payments were on that debt.
Okay, and what's the standard for the industry?
Anywhere between 5 and 10% is what the rating agencies look for.
Okay, good. Okay.
So, like for instance, if you don't have enough debt, they'll be curious as to why you don't have enough debt, and they'll ask you about the condition of your buildings and your schools and things like that. Years ago, that had hardly any debt, and it wasn't helping them at all because everybody suspected that their roads were in bad shape, that their schools were falling apart, and so it's good to take on enough debt to keep structure in your community viable.
Good. Is that kind of philosophy that it's not the debt, it's how you manage the debt?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So we issued a management letter. We had no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. Our comments mainly were related to operational efficiencies and safeguarding internal assets through internal controls. We had one new comment about internal control changes that were implemented during the pandemic, and we're recommending that continuously monitor those changes, any changes that are brought about by the pandemic, and make sure that there are adequate controls in place or mitigating factors that allow those changes to occur without putting the city's assets at risk. We had two prior year comments, one on the golf course monitoring, the golf course contract monitoring, and then another one on old personal property tax balances that are outstanding, some of them going back 20 years or more. And we're recommending that those are either abated or written off or somehow dealt with, but they are reserved for on the financial statements, so they're not reported at their full value. And then we have two kind of continuing information comments, if you will. One is on the retirement system funding level being down as low as it has been. And the other one is on cybersecurity. And we're recommending that you continuously monitor your cybersecurity. I'm sure you're all aware that the school department was hacked recently, and it's happening all over the place. And you just have to do the best you can to protect the information that you have. No, there's no magic to that, but it's something that we feel like it's worth mentioning. So, management letter, again, no real red flags. It's mostly informational materials. The single audit we do each year, anytime a community has over $750,000 of federal expenditures that is required. This past year, you had almost 75 million of expenditures, and 74% of that was for the school department, 19% was for community development, and the other 5% was for a bunch of other grants. Audited, so we have to audit, every year we audit a rotating number of grants based on your major program status, which is for you, anytime you get over 25 million, the major programs funding level is at 3% of the total. So your number was a little over 2.2 million. So that had us look at, on a rotating basis this past year, we looked at the Continuum of Care program. It's a community development program, the Title I program at the schools, and the supporting effective instruction state grants at the schools. That's formerly teacher quality grant that they renamed. So those programs, as well as the schedule of expenditures of federal awards in total, And we didn't have any findings, no compliance issues, no question costs or any other findings related. So that's a clean audit opinion, and it's done. It gets submitted to the audit clearinghouse when we're done with it, and any granting agency can access that report through the clearinghouse and see what we audited and what our findings were and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to just flip down. The rest of our PowerPoint goes through our audit plan and talks about kind of our objectives and things like that. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I just want to go down to page 20 and talk a little bit about our timeline. So we're auditing pretty much year round for the city. Most of it is between planning work is between April and September. And then we do most of the field work September and October, and then prepare the draft reports in November and December. This year, for 20, we issued the financial statements on November 18th. And that's a testimony to Pat's group and everyone involved in finance, because we start the audit in earnest pretty much in the middle of September. And within 2 months, we're able to issue the final reports. So everything comes through the portal. Everything was provided to us on a timely basis, and we get the reports done. And it takes a while. When you do a comprehensive annual financial report, you've got a lot of other things beyond the normal financial statements, gathering all the information for the statistical section and the combining statements, the transmittal letter that finance helps out with. It's really a team effort. There's a lot of work that goes into that document, and to get it produced in that time frame is a good accomplishment for everybody. So that, and then I'm just going to go down and talk about on page 23. There's a couple of new GASB statements coming out. The one that's going to be effective for FY21 is statement 84 on fiduciary activities. It's going to change. You have a fund called the agency fund currently. It's going to change the components of that a little bit. It's going to change the name of the fund to custodial funds from agency funds. And some of the activities that are currently recorded there may have to be recorded as special revenue funds going forward under the new standard. Why they're doing this, I'm not really sure. It doesn't seem to benefit anybody except the GASB. But it'll be implemented this next year. And then in FY22, there's a new statement coming out on leases. And basically what they're doing is going away from operating leases and having you treat all new leases as capital leases, where the assets and the liabilities get recorded on the financial statements in full, rather than just footnote disclosure that's allowed for operating leases currently. So the city has a fair number of leases, and we spent a fair amount of time gathering all of that information. It's going to get even more complicated as we get into this new statement in FY22. So we're putting that out there and just letting everybody know that it's coming. We've been talking to management about it and ensuring that the lists of leases and the schedules and all those things are up to date, which they have been. So we'll be ready for that one as well. And that's pretty much it. I'm just happy to take any questions or talk through anything you'd like. But I don't know how much time we have. I don't know if there's a time limit on this Zoom or not, but
there is no time limit. But are there any questions from the counselors that haven't been asked?
I mean, I've got a couple, or at least one or two for Mike or for Young. Can I go?
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. So Mike, on the pension thing, obviously we have to pay approximately $4 million more every year because of the status of our pension. So it's 47, our annual payment is 47 million one year, it's 51 the next, and it's 55 the next. And when I say us, I'm talking just the city side. I know the water department's in there, and the housing authority, and the school department
is also in there too.
Right, and the school department. So it's just going to get worse. I mean, the difference of 4 million per year is going to be 5 or 6 or something, and it gets almost untenable. I mean, I look at it and I say, how can? Of course, I was around when it was 30 million, and somehow we're still surviving with it being 50. But do you have any recommendation or any thought, or does that make you feel that our finances are in a weaker situation than they appear to be? I mean, the finance team's doing great. Every year they're figuring out a way to keep it going. This more aggressive funding schedule, but it gets to 100 million at some point. I don't remember when, but obviously a few years out. I'm not asking for a recommendation, just as a comment. Are we doing the right things we should be doing? Like when I look at the debt service being down around 27 million from 40, or 27 million a year from 40 or something, I'm thinking, well, that might have been an adjustment we made because as pension was going up, something had to come down in terms of the annual payment. So it's not really, I don't really have a specific question as much as just, any comment you have on that. Are we doing well on that? It seems to me we're doing as well as we can be, and kudos to the finance team and everybody, but could you just comment on that?
Yeah, and I'd like Lindsay to comment too, and anyone else that wants to as well. But I mean, the casino money got you to where you're at today, and although that just really came about in the last couple of years, but that was what was being planned for the use of those funds. The mandate is to have the pension fund fully funded by 2040. You're on a schedule to have it funded by 2033. And there's no doubt you're going to have to sacrifice some other services to be able to meet that funding level. Unless there's some other revenue source that's on the horizon that I don't know about, but it's not going to be easy. I mean, I share your concerns. Those numbers, that total funding requirement goes from, for all entities, it's about close to $80 million currently. It goes up to 213 million in 2033, if I remember the number correctly. So it is a huge increase, and it's going to affect your ability to provide services, in some areas. No question about it.
So I know this isn't just thinking out of the box on things that could do. Is there a point in time? Nobody wants to extend this thing out to 2040, but just from a standpoint of looking at options, is there a time when that would be? Is there some magical financial number or ratio or something that tells you when it's time to look at extending the funding schedule? To not, I mean, we have the worst funded pension in the state of Massachusetts, and we're trying to pay it off 7 years ahead of when it needs to be paid off. And that's all great if we can do it, but is there anything we could look at other than just your guys' intuition as to other when we might look at that, if we have to ever look at that?
Yeah, Lindsay, do you want to?
It's the question. I don't want to ask the question, but we're all here together.
No, I know. And we talked about this at our last meeting a couple of weeks ago.
What was the question?
The question is, at what point will a decision be made to either extend the funding level, the time frame out beyond 2033 to 2040? At what point will you make that decision if you find yourselves not being able to continue with that funding schedule?
Well, I mean, Pat Burns, you can jump in here, but I think that it's gonna, when we go back every 2 years to reassess the payment schedule, I think depending where the city is financially during those times, it would be adjusted then if necessary. As of right now, we hope that we never have to do that, but I can't give you a date or a time that it would be changed or a decision would be made to go off the schedule that we currently have. We would just have to wait, for our revaluation.
All right.
Just seeing where the city is financially at that time. I mean, Pat, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the retirement board's thinking is that we have some leeway, whereas if we adopted a schedule now, let's say that went out to 2038, our payments would go down, but we wouldn't be making the headway that we have been making. Whereas you saw we went from 28% to 30%, which doesn't seem like much, but it's a monumental achievement. In my estimation, compared to where we were actually going down quite a bit. So by grabbing that year, keeping it at 2033, lowering our expected rate of return, we're making the payment higher, but we're doing the responsible thing. And God forbid we have another recession or a downturn, we have somewhere to go where we're not up against it. And, you know, at that point, I think that's when we would kind of evaluate, do we want to push it up 3 years or 4 years at that point? But right now, as long as when finance is building the budget, they know they can make that payment, we want to stay on the road we're on and continue making the progress we have been making.
Yeah, I too am encouraged by the 30%. I feel like having a party. I mean, it seems like for years we've been trying to get out of 26, 27, and we did. So that's great. It's more like, what's the point in time when we have the deeper conversation? And I agree with you, Pat. I'm not looking to switch it. I'm just trying to, I like that answer from Lindsay about, you know, when the new funding arrangement is set up, that's a time maybe to look at it a little deeper and just make sure, not can we just afford the new annual funding schedule, but how does it look like it's going to impact the next few years out? And when is the next funding one? Is that a year from now, Pat?
Yes, there'll be a valuation coming up as of 1/1/22. So it'll be actually, this time next year, we'll have a new funding schedule that the retirement board will be considering.
Right, that's what I thought. Okay, that's a good answer. Congrats to everybody for the discipline and the creativity to get this thing going in the right direction. That's great.
You had to mention the lowest in the state though, but.
I did mention it because it's real.
No, I know, but that's, you know, that's really our motivation, is because that's always the first thing when you say the Springfield retirement system, it's lowest in the state. So I'd love to someday no longer make that the case.
I would love to as well. Work along with you guys any way we can to get out of that for sure. But the progress is terrific. That's great. Thank you. I'm all set with that question.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. Are there any other questions from councilors? Seeing and hearing none. Mr. No.
Mr. President, Mr. President,
Councilor Davila. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. And as Councilor Allen was just talking, it just kind of rattled my brain a little to follow up question. And I know that a lot of this is kind of looking to a crystal ball, but with this stimulus money that is supposed to be getting into the city, I think it's 97.5 or $120 million. Does that play any part into the potential decision that Councilor Allen is suggesting as to when we take a closer look at either extending or staying on course of the funding schedule?
So you're going in and out, Councilor Davila?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly now.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
You were going in and out.
You were going in and out. Why don't you see if you can recall the last part of your question? Can you hear me now? We can. Now we can really hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, following up to sort of Councilor Allen's point, does that play any role into any potential decision of either staying the course or extending the funding schedule that we have for the pension?
So, Councilor Davila, I missed the first part, but are you talking about the federal stimulus money? Is that what you were asking?
Yes, I seem to be having connection problem. I kind of lost you there for a second. But would you mind repeating that again?
Yeah, so if I understand your question, asking if any of that funding can help any pension relief whatsoever? The answer is no. It's explicitly written into the act that it can't be used for any kind of pension liability. So I don't know if that was the question you were asking.
I think it was, Lindsay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Councilor Davila, go ahead.
No, I seem to have connectivity problems, but if I understood correctly, the answer was no, it does not help. But that's sufficient to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. If there are no further questions, Mr. No, I will turn it back over to you if you had anything else to add.
I have nothing else, councilors. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. No. Seeing no further questions or comments, Councilor Allen.
Yeah, could I just ask one question of Mr. No? And that is, Young, you mentioned before that you audit these student activities accounts annually. And I know we had a problem with student activities accounts in the past, so I'm not questioning the validity of doing those audits. But I just wonder, do we ever look at whether it would be okay to do student activity accounts every other year and take on something else in the city that we haven't looked at for a while? I don't know the decisions that have been made behind the scenes, but it's certainly not as much money in student activity accounts as I would expect, or I don't know how much money's in there, but I would imagine it'd be a few $1,000s. And I know we had a problem, but is it really necessary to audit them every year?
Yes, the Massachusetts general laws requires an annual audit of student activities, in particular those activities that have account balances over 25,000. So we don't look at, we typically don't look at the smaller student activities, but we do look at the larger student activities. And we're saving the city money by doing the audits for 2 years by the city's internal audit, and having the audit done the third year by Powers and Sullivan as required by law. You know, we could outsource the whole review to Powers and Sullivan, but that wouldn't be as cost effective for the city.
Well, you answer my question by saying the state requires it. That's my answer, I guess, for 25,000 or over. Okay.
In total, there's about $250,000 that is typically in those funds in total.
Really?
Yeah.
A little different when I was in high school.
Yeah. No, it was different this year too. The levels were down quite a bit because of the, all of the activities being postponed or canceled, like the cap and gowns and.
So the money sat in there.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Earned, yeah.
Gotcha. All right.
All right. With that being said, thank you, Mr. No. Thank you, Lindsay and Pat. Thank you to everyone from Powers and Sullivan, and thank you, counselors. We will stand adjourned.
Yeah,
have
great
a
job.
Wonderful
Everybody.
afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job by everybody, really.